A US court has approved a bankruptcy plan for the maker of the painkiller OxyContin. The deal gives the owners of Purdue Pharma, the Sackler family, sweeping immunity from future lawsuits over claims they helped to fuel the US opioid crisis. The Sacklers will give up ownership of the company and pay out $4.5 billion over the next 10 years to settle existing lawsuits. Most US states, hospitals, Native American tribes and other creditors have approved the settlement, but some states say they'll appeal, largely because of the legal protections granted to the Sacklers. While the settlement also sets up a compensation fund, the judge who has conditionally approved the deal says the Sacklers have shown little remorse for OxyContin's contribution to the opioid epidemic. More than 500,000 people in the US have died in the crisis. Well, let's get more on this now with Robert Kanter in New York. He's an international drug addiction recovery advocate focusing on the opioid epidemic. Good to have you back with us, Robert. So here we have Purdue Pharma essentially declaring bankruptcy, dissolving, and the Sacklers agreeing to pay about $4.5 billion over the next decade to settle existing lawsuits. What's your reaction to this deal that's been conditionally approved?
You know, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor and privilege. I appreciate it. The recovery community is just all over the place with this, and I'll give you an example why. 2 days ago, the Sackler family circulated, or their attorney circulated, a letter to the Department of Justice appealing to them to not appeal this decision, and they positioned themselves as if they were representing the victims, and people were outraged by this. And those that have lost loved ones to these medications are outraged as well that they're going to get immunity. And I'll go out on a limb and tell you personally, as someone that's in recovery from substance use disorder, that I think it's a good deal because the money has to go to treatment, and that's what will happen. The everyday money doesn't go to treatment, lives are lost. I mean, that's just the bottom line. And the other thing I'll say, and in no way when I say this am I defending Purdue Pharma or the Sacklers, there were many culpable parties in this opioid epidemic, whether it's the Food and Drug Administration, whether it's pharmacists, whether it's physicians and overprescribing. And I only say that not to, leave Purdue Pharma off the hook, but to understand that this is the deal. This is the environment we're working in, and it's just a no-win situation. Why the heck is this even in bankruptcy court to begin with? It obviously makes no sense. But it is what it is. How long is this going to drag out? And I just make a point. It's not a done deal. The Department of Justice may appeal as well. And that's what the purpose of the letter was for from Purdue. We got to move on. We've got to get money to treatment. I mean, I just think it's absolutely ridiculous. But I also respect how family members that have lost loved ones they just want to go for their throats. I get that. But I'm just happy. To answer your question, I'm happy with the ruling.
Well, it seems that the bankruptcy judge who conditionally approved this deal would agree with your sentiments. Judge Robert Drain says while he's frustrated that so much Sackler money is in fact in offshore accounts, he essentially wants to see some sort of a funding mechanism to help the victims of this crisis. And he says essentially that something is better than nothing. So you don't believe that perhaps authorities should have waited for a larger settlement?
Absolutely not. I think we discussed this before on the opioid distributors trial. Absolutely not, because one of the things the judge said is that if this is not resolved, it's going to create a cascade of legal lawsuits that are so complicated and will be dragged out for so long that no one's going to benefit. Again, as I consider the Sacklers to be the driving force of what I call a man-made plague, an opioid health crisis. But the fact is, they have a saying in the recovery community, you have to surrender to win. And I think that's where we're at this point. How long do you want this to drag out? How many lives do you want to lose? As we've talked about before, the fentanyl that's on the streets now is so potent that it's taking many lives. You're coming off a pandemic, so we have an epidemic in a pandemic. Sooner or later, we just have to throw up our hands and saying we're getting $4.5 billion. Let's get it to treatment. Let's get it to social services.
From what we understand so far, this deal would protect members of the Sackler family from any civil litigation in the future over its OxyContin drug, but I don't think it absolves them or protects them from criminal charges. There are calls from some advocates and some victims' family members for the Sacklers to face a criminal court. Do you believe they should face criminal charges over their alleged role in this crisis?
Oh, absolutely. Well, their behavior was egregious. Absolutely. I think that the Department of Justice, or I know they were waiting to see how the settlement played out, and then they're going to go from there. Again, just going back to what I said at the beginning of this interview, don't get me wrong. I believe the Sacklers are criminals. Okay, I'm just saying, we have a complicated scenario here, and we want to try to work this out as best we can to get treatment to those still suffering. Thank God it doesn't alleviate any or give them any exemptions from criminal activity. And I hope they do. I hope they do proceed forward with that. Absolutely. The amount of lives that were lost, it's horrific.
Yes, and even though there's been so much attention put on OxyContin and other opioids, as you say, there are other drugs out there that are currently killing Americans every day. In fact, fentanyl is one of them. What more needs to be done in order to address this substance abuse problem that's gripping large parts of America right now?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. It always comes from a place of treatment. And I talk about the Portugal model of harm reduction. The country of Portugal, 20 or so years ago, had a very bad heroin epidemic. They removed it from their criminal justice system. They brought it into their Ministry of Health. They worked with those individuals. We talk about compassion. Stigma is the opposite of stigma is the opposite of compassion. And they gave them harm reduction tools. They separated the illness from the individual, and they focused on treatment, not on trying to punish the problem away. They reduced their epidemic by 75%. Everything has to head in the direction of treatment, not in the direction of punishment. And again, I'm not talking about the Sacklers, but everything we're doing, in my opinion, has to go toward treatment. To me, that's how you solve the problem, because when the demand is not there, doesn't matter what the supply is.
Okay, Robert Kanter, we will have to leave it there, but it was really good to get your analysis. Thank you so much again.